After I gave birth, my husband said he needed space to sort things out. He packed a small bag and walked out of the house. No fight, no shouting, just silence. At first I thought it was just stress. Maybe he was overwhelmed like I was. But as the days turned into weeks and he still hadn't returned no calls, no messages, I started to wonder if I'd missed something, or if something had already been decided, and I was the last to know. If you've ever been left with questions and no answers, stay with me. And if this story strikes a chord, leave a comment or subscribe, because sometimes the quietest moments hide the loudest truths. Elena Whitmore stood outside Riverdale Elementary, her coat zipped to the top as a chill cut through the spring air in suburban Oregon. Her newborn son, Oliver, was asleep in a carrier strapped to her chest. In her hand was Sophie's re-enrollment form, creased and damp from being clutched too tightly. It was her first time back at the school since giving birth, and it would be the day everything quietly fell apart. The glass doors of Riverdale Elementary gave a subtle hiss as Elena stepped inside her boots, squeaking softly on the polished floor. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours the night before Oliver had been fussier than usual, and her hand still trembled slightly, even as she handed over the re-enrollment form at the front desk. "Is this for Sophie Langford?" the receptionist asked, with a polite smile. Elena nodded. "Yes. She's been out the past 6 weeks. I just had her baby brother." "Oh, congratulations," the woman replied, eyes flicking down to the sleeping infant. "You can take this to room 104. Ms. Evans will handle the rest." Room 104. Elena had typed that number on dozens of lunchboxes. She knew the layout of that classroom by heart. And yet today, her steps slowed with every inch she moved closer. Not because of the baby weight or the lingering soreness from the C-section, but because something unshakable had taken root in her gut over the past month. A cold kind of knowing. Inside room 104, the morning was unfolding like any other. Children laughed as they placed their backpacks in cubbies. There were crayons already scattered on a side table. A handmade "Welcome Back" Sophie sign hung over a corkboard, complete with glitter-glued stars, and standing at the far side of the room next to a child's desk was Charlotte Evans, Sophie's teacher. Elena paused in the doorway. Charlotte didn't see her at first. She was talking to someone. A man. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The man was tall, broad-shouldered in a navy jacket she recognized immediately. Edward's jacket. Her husband's jacket. He leaned slightly toward Charlotte, one hand resting casually against the edge of her desk. She laughed, soft, comfortable. Familiar. Too familiar. Elena's fingers curled around the stroller handle. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Charlotte finally noticed her and gave a startled blink before smiling like nothing was out of place. "Mrs. Langford, welcome back, is that little Oliver?" Edward turned. His expression froze. So did Elena's. They hadn't spoken in over 5 weeks. No phone calls, no visits, not even a text asking how Oliver was doing. And now he was here in their daughter's classroom with her teacher. Laughing. Elena forced herself to keep her voice level. "I was told I could drop this off with you." Charlotte stepped forward, taking the form, acting as if Edward weren't standing there like a man who had just been caught shoplifting peace. "Absolutely," Charlotte said cheerfully. "And Sophie can rejoin as early as Monday if that works for you." Elena nodded, her jaw tightening. "That's fine." Edward didn't say a word. He adjusted his jacket, looked away, and muttered something about heading back to his car. He left without touching the baby, without asking a single question. Charlotte smiled again, too brightly. Elena didn't smile back. Back in the car, Elena buckled Oliver into his seat with mechanical movements. Her hands shook again this time, not from lack of sleep, but adrenaline. She sat behind the wheel, staring at the school building for a long moment before starting the engine. She wasn't stupid. That hadn't been a coincidence. She remembered the jacket. She remembered how Charlotte had complimented it, once said Edward looked so polished during a parent-teacher conference. And now somehow he was here, with her. That evening, Elena messaged Edward. "Sophie starts back Monday. I saw you at the school today." No reply. She didn't message again. By the end of the week, Elena knew she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Edward hadn't come back because he didn't want to. And Charlotte Miss Evans, the woman who had sent Sophie home with birthday cards and notes full of teacherly affection, was involved. How deeply Elena didn't know. Yet, the first thing she did was check the bank. Their joint account showed multiple withdrawals over the past 4 weeks, hotel charges, restaurants, and something labeled Cedar View Floral and Wine. Elena didn't receive any flowers. Next, she checked Edward's social media. There wasn't much. He hadn't posted since New Year's Eve. But Charlotte's Instagram, which had once been private, was now partially public. And in a photo of a brunch spread at a trendy downtown cafe, Elena spotted the corner of a man's sleeve. Navy blue, same texture, the same jacket. Elena didn't tell anyone, not her sister, not her best friend. She focused on Sophie and Oliver. Kept the routine. But at night, once both kids were asleep, she sat up with her laptop and started documenting everything. Receipts, screenshots, notes, dates, even voice memos describing what she'd seen and felt. She didn't know exactly what she would do with it all yet, but she knew this wasn't going to end quietly. 2 weeks later, Edward finally reached out. "We need to talk about the house." "No apology, no questions about Oliver, just business," Elena replied. "We will, with lawyers." She met with Imogen Clark, a family law attorney referred by a friend. Imogen was sharp, concise, and didn't blink when Elena handed her a folder full of neatly printed tabs, timeline, financials, observations. Imogen raised an eyebrow. "You're thorough." "I'm a mother," Elena said, "and I've had time." During their meeting, Elena learned that Oregon is a no-fault divorce state. Adultery doesn't change the right to file, but it can influence custody and financial negotiations if there's evidence of instability or inappropriate relationships involving children. Elena didn't want revenge. She wanted clarity. She wanted safety. She wanted control over what her children would one day understand as the truth. Meanwhile, Sophie returned to school. She was quiet for the first few days. A bit clingy. She didn't say much about Ms. Evans. But one evening, while coloring at the kitchen table, she asked Mommy, "Why did Daddy come to my class when you weren't there?" Elena paused. "When was this, sweetie?" "The day we did butterflies. He helped Ms. Evans hang the big ones." Elena smiled tightly. "I'm not sure, honey. Maybe he was helping out." Sophie nodded, but her little brow furrowed. Then she said something that made Elena's stomach twist. "Ms. Evans told me not to tell you." By the end of March, Elena had what she needed. She knew Edward had been staying part-time at an apartment complex not far from Charlotte's. She confirmed via a delivery service receipt that he'd sent wine and flowers to her classroom address on Valentine's Day, while Elena was still bleeding from surgery feeding their infant in the dark. And perhaps most importantly, she learned from another parent that Charlotte had recently updated her relationship status on Facebook. In a relationship. No name, no tag. But the timing matched everything. Elena didn't explode. She didn't confront them. She didn't post anything online. Instead, she scheduled a second meeting with Imogen, this time bringing a second folder labeled Documentation of Inappropriate Contact between Teacher and Parent. Imogen looked up from the page, her voice steady. "You understand this could affect her job?" Elena nodded. "She works with children. One of them is mine." That week, Elena filed for divorce. She cited irreconcilable differences and submitted a formal letter of concern to Riverdale Elementary's administration regarding Charlotte Evans' conduct with a student's father. She didn't accuse her of anything inappropriate with Sophie. She didn't need to. All she needed was the truth. Let the system decide the rest. By early April, the school had launched an internal review. The letter Elena submitted hadn't been dramatic. Just factual dates, observations, and the mention that her daughter Sophie had been told by Ms. Evans to withhold information from a parent. Elena didn't demand disciplinary action. She requested transparency, that was all. Riverdale Elementary couldn't ignore it. Charlotte Evans was quietly placed on leave pending administrative review. Elena received an email from the school counselor offering a follow-up call regarding Sophie's emotional well-being. She accepted. Sophie never returned to room 104, Edward called her 2 days later. For the first time in almost 2 months, his voice cracked through the phone. "You filed a complaint against Charlotte." "Yes," Elena said. There was a long pause. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "That's Sophie's teacher. She stopped being Sophie's teacher the moment she got involved with you." He didn't deny it. "Elena, he started again. You didn't have to go this far." She hung up. What Edward didn't know was that Elena was already several steps ahead. While he was texting vague ultimatums, she and Imogen had been gathering bank records, subpoenaing location data from shared accounts, and building a quiet but lethal custody strategy. Elena didn't want to share custody with a man who had proven himself willing to abandon an infant. And she especially didn't want Sophie around someone who had blurred the line between authority and manipulation. "Here's what we'll do," Imogen said during their latest meeting. "We'll show not just abandonment, but active concealment. He wasn't just gone. He was playing house with someone your child depended on for structure and safety." Elena nodded. She wasn't afraid anymore. Meanwhile, Edward's behavior began to shift. He texted more often. He offered to take the kids for a weekend, despite never asking how Oliver was sleeping or what formula he used. Elena refused politely. She wasn't withholding, she was documenting. Every time Edward failed to follow up, ignored basic childcare needs, or responded with irritation, Imogen logged it. "Don't push him," Imogen advised. "Let him reveal himself." And he did. One Thursday morning, Elena opened her inbox to find an email from Edward's attorney. A new name. A different tone. The subject line, proposed custody agreement. The proposal was audacious. Edward wanted 50-50 custody, the house to be sold, and profit split, and no child support exchanged either way. "Elena, this is a pressure move," Imogen said, scanning the document. "He's hoping you'll panic." "I won't," Elena said. "Let's respond with facts." They countered by attaching a timeline of Edward's absence, copies of pediatric appointment records showing no participation, and emails showing missed opportunities to engage with Sophie's school or therapy follow-ups. Then Imogen added a single sentence. "My client is willing to negotiate terms grounded in reality, not fiction." Behind the scenes, Elena kept track of Charlotte's movements. Though officially on leave, she was spotted more than once at the complex Edward had moved into. One of Elena's neighbors mentioned seeing Sophie in the back seat of Edward's car parked outside the building. That was the final line. Elena called Imogen that night. He took Sophie to Charlotte's apartment. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but I'll get it." That weekend, Elena left Oliver with her sister and drove to the building. She parked across the street with a borrowed DSLR camera and waited. It didn't take long. Charlotte stepped out of the complex just after noon. Sophie trailed behind, holding a cupcake box. They laughed. They posed for a selfie. And then Charlotte leaned over and kissed the top of Sophie's head. That was it. Click. A time-stamped photo. Irrefutable. The following Monday, Imogen submitted a motion to limit Edward's visitation until a full custody hearing could take place. The evidence included documented abandonment, breach of trust involving a figure in Sophie's educational environment, emotional instability caused by shifting households, a clear lack of parental engagement during the newborn's critical care period. The judge, Margaret Ashbury, reviewed the material silently for almost 15 minutes. Then she spoke. "Mr. Langford will be granted supervised visitation pending final custody hearing. Any unsupervised visitation or delegation of care to non-family parties is suspended immediately." Edward's attorney looked rattled. Edward himself didn't show up. By May, Elena had moved into a new apartment, modest but quiet. The kids shared a room. Sophie was transferred to a different school where no one knew what had happened. Oliver began sleeping through the night. Elena returned to freelance copywriting part-time. Her sister helped with daycare. Her days were busy, messy, and full of routines. But they were hers. She didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a mother with a plan. One afternoon, she received a knock on the door. It was a woman in a business suit, early 40s. Tired eyes. "Ms. Whitmore?" "Yes. My name is Deborah Green. I represent the District Review Board for Riverdale Elementary." Elena nodded, waiting. "We've concluded the investigation. Ms. Evans has been offered the opportunity to resign quietly. She's accepted. There will be no formal report, but she will not be returning to any role within the district. Elena nodded again. Thank you, she said simply. Your daughter deserves a safer learning environment, the woman added. We're sorry. Elena didn't say anything else. She just closed the door and exhaled. That night, she wrote an email to Imogen. Let's proceed with full custody. I'm ready. May 15th arrived with the kind of stillness that only comes before impact. Elena Whitmore dressed simply dark slacks, a blouse the color of dusted rose, no makeup beyond what was necessary to hide the exhaustion of motherhood. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to finish something. The courthouse hall was quiet, though the tension between opposing attorneys vibrated just beneath the surface. Edward was already inside, seated at the far end of the table beside his new lawyer. He didn't look at Elena when she walked in. Elena didn't need him to. Judge Margaret Ashbury entered with the same calm precision she had shown during the emergency motion hearing weeks prior. She glanced at the folders laid out in front of her. Then she looked directly at Elena. Ms. Whitmore, you may proceed. Imogen rose first. Her presentation was brief, methodical. She didn't lean on emotion. She leaned on fact. Documented absence of the father for 5 consecutive weeks after the birth of his son. 0 participation in medical appointments or school reintegration. Unapproved contact between the child and an adult formerly in an authority position at her school. Evidence of psychological manipulation toward the child, including instructing Sophie not to share information with her mother. Financial withdrawals from a joint account during the period of abandonment. The exhibits were neatly tabbed, color-coded, and chronologically ordered. Elena didn't speak during any of it. She didn't need to. When Edward's lawyer responded, she attempted to paint a picture of a father seeking balance who made a mistake in timing but was deeply committed to co-parenting. Judge Ashbury didn't blink. She flipped through the folders again. Has your client provided any documentation of financial support for the newborn during the absence? The attorney hesitated. At that time, Mr. Langford was not. No, the judge interrupted. Has he visited a pediatric appointment since returning to Portland? No. Has he submitted a formal parenting plan that doesn't rely on outside parties like Ms. Evans? Silence. When it was over, the courtroom fell still. Judge Ashbury removed her reading glasses and folded her hands neatly. This is a matter of fundamental parenting, she said. Not entitlement, not convenience. The actions presented demonstrate a pattern of disregard not only for shared parental responsibility, but for the emotional and psychological safety of the children involved. Her voice remained calm, but the decision came down like a gavel before the actual one was even struck. Elena Whitmore will retain primary physical and legal custody of both children. Edward Langford will receive supervised visitation at designated intervals pending review after 6 months. No unsupervised contact shall occur in the presence of Ms. Charlotte Evans or any non-approved adult. She turned to Edward. You walked away from your family. The court recognizes your right to rebuild a relationship with your children. But not on your terms. Not anymore. Then she struck the gavel. And just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, Elena stood on the stone steps holding a manila folder against her chest. It wasn't just paper. It was everything she'd fought through, the late nights with a crying newborn, the days Sophie asked why Daddy didn't come home, the silence, the confusion, the betrayal. It was all in that folder, and now it had weight, legal weight, protective weight. A familiar voice called her name. Sophie was running toward her, released from her aunt's arms. Mama, she cried. Elena bent down and caught her mid-run. Did you win? Sophie asked softly. Elena smiled. I protected us, she said. Sophie nodded as if she understood in some deep 5-year-old way that sometimes winning didn't mean shouting louder or being seen, but holding steady and telling the truth, no matter how long it took to be heard. That night, Elena returned to their apartment. The air was still. Oliver was already asleep. Sophie was watching cartoons with her favorite stuffed fox tucked under her arm. Elena stood in the kitchen staring at the sink for a long time. Then she opened a drawer, pulled out her phone, and wrote a text. It wasn't for Edward. It wasn't for Charlotte. It was for herself. We survived the silence. We survived the lies. And now we're building something better from the ground up. She hit send to no one, then she deleted it. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Official letterhead, Riverdale School District. Charlotte Evans had officially resigned. There would be no appeal, no reassignment. The school counselor who had worked with Sophie followed up to say she was adjusting beautifully to her new classroom, making new friends, and was surprisingly resilient. Elena smiled at that. Not surprising at all. It was early evening when Edward called. Elena hesitated before answering. But she did. I just wanted to say, he began. I didn't expect it to end like this. Elena didn't respond. He continued. Charlotte moved out. Still, she said nothing. I lost everything, he finally said. I thought you'd want to know. Elena breathed in once, steady and quiet. Then she replied, I didn't lose anything. I just stopped pretending something was still there. Click. She hung up. Later that night, she tucked Sophie into bed and whispered, There's nothing wrong with starting over. As long as you know who you are when you do. In the dark, she returned to her desk, where a printed card sat beside her laptop. It was from her lawyer, Imogen, mailed the day after the final hearing. Simple and handwritten. You fought smart. You fought well. You protected your children with grace. That's what justice really looks like. Elena picked it up, read it one last time, and smiled. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, permanent, and it was hers.